Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Tomcat Stitchery. I'm Whitney, and today we are going through 3 tips to help increase the longevity of your handmade wardrobe. So, kind of 3 little things that you can do, 2 as you're making said handmade garment, and 3 after the fact, but ways that we can extend the life of our garments, which is a very important topic. I feel like, in our society, there's a lot of talk on fast fashion, and, not only is that bad for the environment, but it's wasteful, and, yeah, aside from everything, again, with environmental impacts, but also, do we need all of that? From a mental standpoint, it can clutter your space, your mind, all that kind of thing. And I feel like there is a shift towards, which is a fantastic thing, the way things used to be, where you would take really good care of the garments that you had, and they were made better, and you would mend things when they would fall apart, and all of that, surrounding all of that in that vein. But on another note, for those of us that sew, we spend a lot of time and money to create these beautiful things that fit us just the way we want them to fit us, and the colors are the colors we want to wear, and the styles are the styles we want to wear. And how do we make sure that those garments last as long as possible, because we put all this time and money into those? So these are 3 simple things that you can do to help increase the longevity of said garments. So number 1, I've got things in my lap here to show you all, props, if you will. But rule number 1 is just finishing your seams. So if you are someone that is new to sewing and you are, tackling garment sewing for the first time, or maybe if you're even someone that was in the quilting world where you don't finish seams because it all gets, put inside the quilt, this could be something that's a little different and maybe something you haven't even thought about. But finishing our seams is a real important aspect of making sure that the longevity of our garments stay, because when we wash our things, whether we're hand washing, machine washing, if we've not finished those seams, that fabric is going to fray, unless you're working with a knit. Knit fabrics don't fray. You can get away without finishing seams on those. But any kind of seam finish on the inside, and I'll show you what I'm talking about here in just a second, are going to help increase the longevity of that garment. Now, some ways, I have an entire video on seam finishes, and I'm actually going to leave it linked down below, as well as I did a whole series. I did a video on 5 tips to make your garments go from homemade to handmade, and then I did a whole series of videos kind of delving into each of those tips in more detail on ways that you can kind of improve your sewing, and I will leave a link to that playlist down below as well. But so there's many different seam finishes that you can use to help finish that off. I typically, for the most part, tend to do a serge seam, which this is what a serge seam, if you've got any ready to wear, it looks something like this. So this is a woven garment. This is a pair of linen pants, and I have stitched the seam, which is really hard to see because I did a really good job of matching my thread to my fabric, but stitched my seam, and then I finished off the seam allowance with my serger. So it's a whole bunch of loops of thread that wrap around that raw edge so that it doesn't fray when it gets washed and worn. It helps against friction and that sort of thing. Alternatively, if you don't have a serger, which if you're starting off sewing, chances are you don't, you can finish off that seam with a faux overlock stitch. That's usually a stitch that is on your sewing machine. Usually it has a separate foot that you might use. You can finish it off with a zigzag stitch. Or if you want to get fancy, there's a few other seam finishes that you can use, such as flat felled seams or French seams are another really great way. Nice strong seam that will help increase the longevity of your seams, so you're not getting holes in things, basically. Obviously, mending is always a option in those scenarios, but that is a really great way to help stabilize those. Again, I have an entire video on different seam finishes showing you how to do that, as well as that whole series. So link in the description box down below if you're interested. Okay, tip number 2 is stabilizing some of those seams. And what I mean by this is I've got a few different products here. If I am using thicker fabric, so if I am making maybe a jacket or a coat or linen pants that like to get baggy, I love a product, and this is called cotton twill tape. It is 1/4 of an inch wide, and this is, try and get it off my face so it will focus. It's got like a little kind of a scallopy edge on one side and a straight edge on the other side. The scallopy edge just allows it to go into curves a little bit better. This is the stuff that you want to put into your seam allowances to keep them from stretching out. So again, shoulder seams of jackets. If you've got, especially like a tailored jacket, like a blazer, that sort of thing, where you've got shoulder pads and a heavier sleeve because you've got a lot of stuff built in there, twill tape in that shoulder seam is going to keep that shoulder seam from stretching out. I'll talk about knits here in a second as well in regards to that. Twill tape can also be really great in the waistband of pants. Now, this pair of pants actually has an elastic waistband, which elastic is going to help stabilize a waistband anyway. So there's elastic in the back. These are inside out. But if you have a standard straight waistband and you've got the seam, so here is my waistband here. You've got the seam that is there at the top for the waistband and the waistband facing. If you sew a piece of this twill tape into the seam allowance there at the top of the waistband, and then sew it on the facing side. So then when you do your understitching so that it goes around to the back side, it keeps it nice and hidden, basically. It helps to keep your waistband from stretching out. This is great on any kind of fabric that you might be wearing pants out of, but specifically linen, because linen does have a tendency to grow. It's a little looser weight fabric and it relaxes with body heat. So love this for that. Also with linen pants, if you get the sagging bottom because the crotch has stretched out as you've worn it through the day, this pair of pants, I actually did it after the fact, but I'm going to give you a little tutorial here in just a second on how to do this. I put twill tape into the crotch curve of my pants. So here it is sewn in. Now, typically, because again, I did this after the fact, so I'd already serged that seam. But if you put this in, sew your seam, the crotch seam, again, I'm going to show you here in a second, then sew in your twill tape into that seam allowance and then finish it, serge it, zigzag it, whatever. That works really well. But I have put that twill tape in from the bottom. This has a faux fly. So from the bottom of the faux fly all the way through to center back. And it's just stitched into that seam. Really helps to keep that, because that's cut on the bias there through that crotch curve, keeps it from growing throughout the day. So really quickly, let me take you over to the machine and show you, I've had a lot of questions on this one, and show you how you sew this into the crotch curve. Okay, so I'm going to show you how I put the twill tape into the crotch curve of a pair of shorts. Now, I am doing this as I'm making shorts, but keep in mind, if you have a pair of shorts or pants that have already been made, such as this pair, you can do this just as easily. The only difference is that, so this is after the fact, I sewed the twill tape in to the crotch seam, and I started here at the bottom of the faux fly and then just went all the way around until I got up here near the center back, the waistband, and just sewed that in. This twill tape doesn't fray, so you don't have to worry about finishing anything else off. So that is an option. It's not as pretty, but if it's something that you have a pair of existing pants that you just really would like that in, you can absolutely do it after the fact. That's fine. Okay, so for this example, I am sewing the crotch curve in that I sewed the left leg together and then I sewed the right leg together, and now I'm going to be sewing the two legs together. However, if you are doing a pattern where it has you sew the fronts together, like jeans for instance, where it has you sewing the fronts together and then you sew the backs together, and then including the crotch curves, and then you sew them together at the side seams and then the inseam, you can still do this same thing. You're just going to do it in two passes. So when you sew the front crotch curve, for instance, under the fly, you will sew in the twill tape at that point. And then again with the back, you will just have, when you sew your inseams together, you will have a, these will also, the two pieces of twill tape will also join with that crotch seam. Let me know if that doesn't make sense. All right, so I'm going to be putting my pants together, right sides together, just like you would. putting my one leg inside the other. I just freehanded this. This isn't an actual shorts pattern. I just needed to show a demonstration pair here. All right, so I've got my center backs together at the crotch and my center fronts together at the crotch. So I guess in this scenario, there's no faux fly. This would be like a pair of elastic waist shorts, for instance. And I'm just going to pin my seam allowance. So this way of making pants, we are sewing the crotch curve in one line of stitching, as opposed to sewing the fronts together and sewing that crotch curve together, then sewing the backs all together, and then sewing front to back at side seams and inseam. But it will work. All right, so I'm just gonna go over to the machine real quick. You don't need to see me do this first part, and I'm just gonna sew that crotch seam. So I'm gonna start at center front, I'm gonna sew all the way down until I get to center back. So I'm just gonna go do that really quick and I'll meet you back here. Okay, so now that I have sewn these right sides together, that whole crotch curve all the way around, I've not finished that seam allowance yet. We are now gonna go together to the machine, and this is the twill tape. And we have got one edge that's kind of almost picoed a little bit, and the other one is like a flat edge, a little more tightly woven. We are going to be sewing this right up next to that seam allowance. This is going to go into the seam allowance, and we're going to go, and I'll do this with you. Let's go to the machine, and we are going to sew the twill tape into that seam allowance now. All right, so I do not cut my twill tape. I leave it on the roll. But again, we are going to be lining up. You can see my sewing line here. I'm lining up the straight edge of that twill tape right along that edge of stitching. And I'm just sewing right through the middle of this twill tape. And if you want to start a little above, you can trim off any excess if you'd like. Okay, we're just going to sew right through the middle of the twill tape, and I'm just lining up that flat edge there with, there we go, that flat edge here with that stitching line. Or as close to in the middle of that twill tape as I can get. All right, and once I've sewn that, I can trim off my tape on both ends there. So as you can tell, and I'm not perfectly straight on that, that's fine. We've just bumped up that tightly woven edge, I guess, the flat edge, up right against that stitch line that I made, and we have finished that off. Okay, now I can take it and finish my seam allowance. So however you're finishing off your seam allowance, if you're doing the faux overlock, if you're doing a zigzag, I'm using a serger. So I'm just gonna serge. I'm not gonna cut off any of the twill tape, but I'll probably serge to cut just a little bit of that extra off, but encasing this twill tape in serger. So I'm gonna do that, and I'll be right back. All right, so there we go. We have got that twill tape sewn and now finished into that crotch seam, which once I've pulled my legs out here, we have got everything. There we go. So there is the center back, and it goes all the way around, obviously, to the center front. So now we have essentially helped keep any of that might stretch out of shape from doing that. So if you get the saggy rear end and that sort of thing, this twill tape is going to be much stronger than just the bias cut of that fabric and will help keep that crotch curve the shape that is meant to be. Let me know if you have any questions. Okay, so while this is twill tape is great, it is a heavier fabric. I guess, piece to go into like thicker fabrics. If you are working with knits, such as this t-shirt that I've got here, or even something that's a little bit thinner, lighter weight, you still might want to stabilize, especially with knits, stabilize those shoulder seams if you have a sleeve, because the weight of the sleeve can stretch out that shoulder seam because it's got stretch in the fabric. So I always on my knit t-shirts will stabilize those, but I use a different product on that. Let me turn this inside out. So on my shoulder seams, and I use a fusible, and I will show it the product to you here in just a second, a fusible stay tape, but so here is my shirt inside out. I fuse it onto the back of the back shoulder seam only. And then when I sew that shoulder seam, or in this case, I just use a serger for my t-shirts and then press it towards the back, it gets completely hidden, so you can't even see it there. But this keeps the sleeve from, over the course of time, stretching out that shoulder seam. If you are using any kind of really stretchy fabric, like a viscose spandex or a rayon spandex, this is fantastic for making sure that that sleeve doesn't pull that. So all of a sudden it looks like, you know, you've got an ill-fitting shirt on because that shoulder seam has stretched. You really want to stabilize that. And I use a woven stay tape. This is the So Keezy woven stay tape in a 1/2 inch width. This is what I grab most of the time, and it just really helps keep those nice and stable. You can also use this. I use this same product around the V if I'm doing a V neckline on a t-shirt. This doesn't stretch though, so you want to be careful around your necklines that you're not, you know, using this a lot. But if you are doing, you need a little stabilization, like I said, at the end of a V neckline, or if you're doing a square neckline, maybe at those 2 points of the square. This is also really great for that. Another product that is really good if you are going to be using a twin needle or cover stitch machine for your hems is also this So Keezy, this double-sided fusible stay tape. If you've been around for a while, you've heard me mention this. It is double stick, so it's 1 inch wide, so you are sewing it to the hems of I put it on my sleeves and the hem of my shirt, and then once it's cooled, you peel off the paper, fold it up, press again, and it keeps, not only does it keep your hem in place to do your twin needling or your cover stitch, it makes it very uniform across the whole bottom. So you get a really nice catch of 1 inch, and I didn't have to trim off any fabric. Like my cover stitch, in this case, if you're using a twin needle, this would be a zigzag on the back, but it nicely catches that raw edge on the back, both on the sleeve and on the bottom. Now, when you first do it, and you try and put a shirt on, especially like a sleeve where this needs to stretch, sometimes it keeps it from doing that. But after one wash, this glue washes out and then you're good to go. It also works as kind of a stabilizer. So if you have a hard time getting the tunneling, either with your cover stitch or your twin needle, it helps with that as well. It doesn't tunnel quite as bad. You need to mess with your tension if you're getting horrible tunneling, but this does help because it stabilizes that area really well. So it gives not only a nice professional finish on the inside and on the outside, but it also keeps everything nice and uniform. So stabilize those seams that need to be stabilized, specifically shoulder seams, crotch seams, waistbands that are easy to get stretched out of shape, that sort of thing. So yes. Okay. Tip number 3. So now that we've made these beautiful garments and we've got them in our wardrobes, we need to be taking care of them as well as possible. And this has to do with laundering. A great rule of thumb is if you are using any protein-based fiber, so this is going to be your wools and your silks, you want to treat these fibers like you would treat your hair, okay? If you are using any vegetable-based fiber, such as your linens, hemps, cottons, those are a little bit more resilient, very easy, they can withstand kind of harsher treatment a little bit. So keeping that in mind, your synthetic stuff like your polyesters, whatever. You can kind of do whatever you want with those. So if you are using protein base, such as your wools and silks, I love a product. This is called Soak. And I was introduced to this. It's actually a detergent that doesn't have to be rinsed out. I use this when I'm blocking my sweaters that I knit, but it's a detergent. Like, it works in your washing machine. So I wash my silks and my wools on cold in my washing machine with this. It's really going to help, especially when you're dealing with wool, to help make it not felt. Number one, you definitely want to do, if you're using your machine, especially with wool, on a hand wash cycle so that it doesn't felt. The things that make wool felt are agitation, soap, and heat. So you want to keep your water cold on and the reason this is great because it doesn't really need to be rinsed out. It's nice if it is. So you can use very little agitation on your washing machine if you're using wool, and you're not going to run the risk of felting. As I'm going to just put a caveat out there, always test a sample if in doubt, because I don't want you to ruin a whole, 5-yard piece of fabric that was very expensive, on accident. So definitely check a little sample, throw it in a lingerie bag or whatever. But this stuff is fantastic for your more delicate fabrics. I always wash my silk in the washing machine. In fact, dry cleaning is actually really hard on it because, again, you need to be treating it like your hair. I do put, not my wool I let air dry as yardage, but my silk, I put it in the dryer as yardage. And then once it's a garment, it gets hand washed in delicate soap with, and then air dried, and then I'll steam it or iron it depending on the garment. Wool never goes in the dryer. Well, I shouldn't say that. If you're wanting to steam treat wool, if you're not necessarily wanting to wash it, if it's just going to go, if it's a coat, it's always going to go to the dry cleaner. You can actually put that into the dryer with a damp washcloth, like dry yardage into the dryer with a damp washcloth, and that will essentially steam treat it and get any shrinkage out for you. But if you have washed wool, you don't want to put it into the dryer. You do want to let it air dry, both as yardage and as finished garments, because if it's wet going in, you do run the risk of felting it. Okay, with our vegetable based, so our cottons, linens, hemps, rayon, I'm going to put rayons in there because rayon starts off life as a vegetable based product. Usually it's wood pulp, it's cellulose, sometimes bamboo, kind of depends, but you can absolutely wash those. Those can handle heat, so you can wash those in a washing machine with some heat in there. You can use your regular detergent, although you can absolutely use delicate stuff as well. The less chemicals you're putting in there, the best. And then I pop all that into the dryer before it gets made into garments. My rayon garments, I try and air dry. The reason I put the yardage in the dryer is to help in case it gets put in the dryer at any point. I don't run the risk of anything shrinking on me, but I do try any rayon garments, viscose garments to woven, to let those air dry. My knits I actually do put in the dryer because it helps shrink them up. Sometimes the weight of the viscose combined with the spandex that comes in those knit fabrics makes things grow, and that helps shrink them back up. But my cottons, I feel like the less you use a dryer, the longer your garments are going to stay looking brand new. But sometimes time wins out and my stuff does in fact go into the dryer. So yes, I'm sure that line drying, air drying is the way to help extend the longevity of your garments the much as possible. But if you want to cheat a little bit and throw those into the dryer, that's okay too. But the ones that that can get away with it the most are going to be your linens, your hemps, your cottons, a little bit with the rayon. They're really going to be fine probably in the dryer. You're not going to run the risk of ruining them in the dryer. So there you have it. 3 tips to help increase the longevity of your handmade wardrobe. What are some tips that you guys have? Is there anything that you always do with your handmade garments to make sure that they last and are as good as possible for as long as possible? I would love to hear what you have down in the comments below. All right, guys, that's all I have for today. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you get some sewing in wherever you are. And yeah, until next time, happy sewing. Have a good one.